So the first thing I did was remove the seat. Now, this is the part where I would tell you what size socket you need to remove the factory bolts. But my bike was missing a seat bolt when I got it, so I replaced mine with Allen keys. I also realized that I was working outside in the sun with a black shirt on. Don't stare at my gut, guys. Alright, I've made a lot of progress here, and I've kind of regressed a little bit. Anyway, this is where we took the seat off. The next step is to unplug the wiring running back to the turn signals and brake light. Now, there should be 3 connectors. The light blue, if I remember correctly, is the right turn signal, the orange is the left turn signal, and the white is the tail light and license plate bracket light. To undo these connections, you have to lift up on a little tab, and I couldn't quite get my fingernails under there, so I ended up using a small precision screwdriver. Now, we do plan on reusing these, so I was extra careful to make sure I didn't break anything. Now that we're disconnected, we can pull the wiring harnesses out of the way. Now it's time to remove the fender. On my 2008 Honda Shadow Aero 750, there are 6 bolts that connect the fender to the frame, 3 on each side. So using a 14mm socket, doing one side at a time, we're going to go ahead and remove those. With the bolts removed, we can now take off the cover that holds the turn signal in place. And again, be careful with the wiring harness. We want to save that for later, don't damage that plug. Now be careful when you remove the last bolt, because if you don't support the fender, it's gonna drop. It's not gonna hurt anything, but just be aware. Then we remove the wire tie holding the brake light wiring to the frame, and lift the fender out of the way. So that's what it looks like so far, and now onto the fun stuff. So the plan is to cut right here behind these seat tabs, because I intend on continuing to use my Mustang seat. I thought about hardtailing and going with a Springer seat, but honestly that does not sound comfortable at all. Now I bought these really nice carbide saw blades that are meant for thick metal, and I knew they'd chew through this thing like butter. The only thing is though, it seems like my old NiCad battery reciprocating saw wasn't up to the task, and I am very surprised how quickly these batteries drained. So I had to bust out old reliable, the old Harbor Freight electric saw, and that did the trick. And then I took a grinder and kind of smoothed out those rough edges. Knowing me, I would have hurt myself on them at one point or another. And to cover up the bare metal, I grabbed a can of Rust-Oleum truck bed liner I had laying around. And then after realizing that can was empty, I went back inside and got a different can of Rust-Oleum paint and used that instead. And I'm not worried about heavy coats or good coverage. I'm just trying to stop rust. Alright, frame is cut. That was a little nerve-wracking. I've been anxious about that all day, to be honest with you. So next is going to be the rear fender, but I'm saving that one for later. It's going to mount kind of down in this area somewhere, and I'm hoping I can reuse these factory holes for my turn signals. Got to get those sorted out in the front, get those sorted out in the rear, and the taillight bracket is going to mount somewhere kind of in this general area. We're going to go over how I installed my Blue Collar Bobber's rear fender. Now this is a quality kit, and comes with everything you need for a direct bolt-on experience. Now we will be deviating slightly though, because we will not be using the bracket that holds the left side of the fender to the bike. That's because I want to use this inexpensive license plate bracket I found on old Amazon. Since this license plate mount is going to take the place of this bracket, and we need the bracket to mount the fender to the bike, we need to go ahead and mark and drill a hole so that it's compatible. First thing we're going to do is take the swing arm bracket and slide it into place. Now this can get a little tricky because you're trying to hold 4 different things at once, but from here you take the bolt, slide it up from underneath, and loosely tighten the nut on top. Now when tightening these down, you don't want to go too crazy. You want it tight, but you don't want it so tight to where you start bending the metal. Once we have that snug down, we want to check our alignment. Now, right now we're kind of centered on the middle of the tire. What we want to do is scooch it over to the left just a hair. That'll give us a little bit more adjustment range when we go to put the fender on. Now that should be perfect. Moving to the right side of the bike, we're going to go ahead and mount the fender bracket. Now this is going to sandwich on the axle itself. I guess that's part of the axle, it could be a tube for all I know, I'm not a mechanic. Installation is super easy, and what I did was I tightened each side down a little bit at a time, just to make sure torque was evenly distributed, and I got a good connection. Make sure your bracket is parallel with the swing arm. This will ensure that the angle is correct. On the left side of the bike, we're going to install our license plate bracket, and the first step is to remove the axle nut. And holy crap guys, even with a 1/2" drive ratchet, that thing was not moving. And even though it still took a little bit of effort, that thing was no match for this 3-foot breaker bar. Now the bracket from Blue Collar Bobbers for the left side of the bike has a notch cut out where it kind of lines itself up with that little ridge. So what we're going to do now is kind of eyeball where that bolt hole is, so when we go to put our license plate bracket on, we got everything lined up at the right angle. And when we think we have it lined up pretty good, we can go ahead and remove the bracket from Blue Collar Bobbers kit and slide our license plate bracket on and tighten the axle nut down. Keep in mind, just keep everything a little loose until everything's in place. And I don't know about you guys, but the burrs on the side of that bracket were kind of bugging the crap out of me. Alright, so next we'll be putting on the fender. So the bolt here on the front, that's what's going to slide into the channel from the swing arm bracket we installed earlier. Now if you'll notice, there was a nut that was sitting closer to the fender. It was in the kit and it threaded on there, so I don't know if it was a mistake or if they changed something in the kit, but if you watch their video, Blue Collar Bobbers, they actually use a washer. So I ended up not using that second nut, we just used the black nylock. So go ahead and tighten down that nut, but make sure you leave it a little loose until we get the fender fully adjusted. Then we're going to install the fender brace on the left side of the bike. So at the top of the strap, there is a captive nut. So these screw in with a Phillips head at the top, and it's going to be a nut and bolt down at the bottom. Now the bracket that came with the kit, this brace actually attaches on the outside, but because we can't do that because we're using the license plate bracket, we're going to mount it to the inside. And then you do the same thing on the right side of the bike. Now I forgot to mention this earlier. These fender braces, the slotted section goes to the brackets that are located, down at the bottom of the bike. That's going to give you your height adjustment to make sure everything clears your tire. Now these are angled slightly different, so they are side specific. I would definitely recommend watching the Blue Collar Bobbers installation video at least 3 or 4 times before doing this. Otherwise you'll end up like me and have to do it twice. With everything snugged, we can go ahead and check our clearances. So basically I just kind of ran my finger underneath the side of the fender and the tire, and I figured as long as I can fit my finger in there, we should be good. And then once the fender's aligned where you want it, the next step is to just tighten everything down. Don't forget that axle nut either, because that would be a bad day. Alright, that's it. We're done. And honestly, I am extremely blown away. And I cannot speak highly enough of the Blue Collar Bobbers rear fender kit. This is top-notch quality, 100%. And I am extremely happy with the way things worked out. Since we don't have that factory fender anymore, now we got to do something about our lights. Alright, so I was going to utilize these factory bolt holes to mount the turn signals, but the metal's just a little too thick, and the stem doesn't go all the way through. So what I did is I just ended up drilling a new hole right behind it because I had plenty of metal left. So these are the turn signals we're going with. They are LED, and they actually came from Amazon. Affiliate link in the description, by the way. And I think they got a real cool look to them, so I think they're going to work out great. And as with any inexpensive light, before you go through the whole trouble of mounting them up, we need to make sure they work. So black wire is going to be our ground, the red wire is going to be the brighter LED, and then the blue is going to be the dimmer LED. So the blue will be our marker light, and then the red will be our turn signal. And for being relatively inexpensive, these lights are actually pretty bright. So now that we verified our lights work, we can go ahead and mount them up. So what you want to do is you just want to go ahead and thread the wires through that hole we drilled in the frame, put the stem of the turn signal through, and what you're going to do is take the nut that came with it and tighten her down. And as I can imagine you guys probably already figured out, the other turn signal goes on the exact same way. So to wire these up, what I did was I actually cut the factory pigtails off the factory turn signals, because I would much rather hack off, something replaceable, like a turn signal harness, as opposed to cutting the actual harness of the bike. Very carefully, what we're doing is we're taking a pair of wire strippers and we're going to remove that outer sheathing and expose those wires. And you only need to strip back a little bit. I mean, you don't need a whole lot, just enough to work with. And then strip the ends of each individual wire, exposing the copper so we can make our connections. Now the best way to ensure a good connection would actually probably be to solder these together. However, because they are fairly inexpensive lights, I'm going to use the bullet style connector. These will make the lights a whole lot easier to replace on the off chance something happens to them. Basically, it just keeps me from having to cut the harness up again. Since we put one side of the connector on the turn signals, now we gotta put the other side on the factory wiring harness. Now these do come with both male and female connections, so make sure you have a matching set on each side. What I tried to do is I tried to put the male end on the turn signal and the female end, since it has the insulation around it, on the wiring harness side. These are actually 3-wire lights, so in the rear, we don't need the running light. We only need the turn signal function. So I'm taking this blue guy here, which was our dimmer LED, and taping him back against the insulation, just to keep it from touching anything. It's just a, little safety precaution is all. And since the tape was already in our hands, we just kept going and covered the wires up a little bit just to protect them. Now, ideally, you'd probably want to use heat shrink, but that would mean I'd have to go to the store again. And if I have to go to the store again, I'm not finishing this project. And now you can plug your lights in. So, the factory wiring harness on my 2008 Honda Shadow Aero 750, the green is actually going to be the ground wire. But if for some reason you haven't plugged in backwards, it shouldn't hurt anything. You'll just have to switch the wires around. So we do the same thing on the other side of the bike. Now I did forget to mention that the factory wire harness, there are 2 different plugs. There's an orange one and a blue one. The blue one is going to be the right side of the bike, the orange is going to be the left side of the bike. And actually the wires are color coded to those plugs, which makes it super easy. I went ahead and made the decision to go ahead and cover those connectors with electrical tape as well. Because like I said before, if I have to stop and go to the store again, I had already been working on this for several hours at this point, and was already fairly kind of annoyed. It's also super hot out. Either way, this should protect them and provide a non-permanent solution. Yeah, that's the rationale I'll go with. Next step is to plug your turn signals in. So, like I said, they're color-coded. The right side of the bike is going to be blue, and since we didn't cut the bike's harness, these are just kind of plug and play now. And on the left side of the bike is going to be the orange connector. It plugs in the same way. And using everyone's favorite tool, the zip tie, go ahead and clean up that wiring a little bit, just to keep it out of the way. You can get as fancy as you want to with it. Basically, my goal is just to keep this thing from falling into the tire. Now that the turn signals are wired up, we can focus on the taillight/brake light. And even though this was purchased separately, the wiring scheme is the same. Just as we did before, we'll go ahead and strip the wires, exposing the copper, because we're going to use those same bullet-style connectors again. And we'll crimp those on just like we did before. And just like the turn signals, we're going to reuse the factory harness for the rear light. This, of course, is just to keep from cutting up the bike's harness, because, I mean, yeah, that's a whole can of worms, and you definitely probably do not want to open. And, of course, again, we remove the sheathing and strip the wires back to expose the copper so we can make our connections. I'm sure by now you're pretty sick of seeing me crimp connectors on wires, but we're almost done. So go ahead and run the wiring harness behind the shock, and now we're ready to plug in our taillight. Now this may not be true for your bike, but on my 2008 Honda Shadow Aero 750, here are the wiring colors for that rear harness. Next step, what I did is I carefully routed the wiring up into the, I don't know, battery compartment? What do you even call this thing? Like the space under the seat. Does it have like an official name? Let me know in the comments. Now that everything's wired and plugged in, we're going to double check our work to make sure we have a tail light, brake light, and turn signals. I'm not sure if it's the lighting or if it was my phone. Those turn signals are actually really bright in person. Like they are... You can definitely see them in the daytime. Alright, so we can go ahead and clean up our wiring harness a little bit. We're going to do the same thing as before, wrap these connectors in electrical tape just to protect them. I'll probably go back and add some heat shrink later, but for now, I'm just trying to get this finished. So then, I ran the wiring harness along the drive shaft, and using our favorite zip tie tools, well, zipped it in place. Now make sure you leave just a little bit of slack because that swing arm will move and you don't want it pulling on those wires. Then just clean the wiring up top below the seat and that should be it. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and give everything one more final test just to make sure we are good to go. I know wiring can be a little, I don't know, scary for some people, like you're real hesitant to dig into it. But honestly, it's not that bad. If you go slow and take your time, you usually end up with good results.
And that's it, right there, bam. Look at the height coming off the frame on that thing. That's a little different than what I expected. I kind of was hoping it would hug a little closer, but compared to the Mustang seat, as far as size, that's like proportional. I'm really digging the way it looks. I mean, it really kind of brings this whole thing together. Now, I'm not done by any means. I want to swap out those shocks. We're going to go with a rigid struts or some lowering shocks. I already have both at the house, so I need to make my mind up because the return window is closing on those guys. I got these exact same ape hangers in black. Those are already there. Just need to put those on. And I want to try to black out these fork covers, just to kind of de-chrome the front a little bit. I thought about blacking out the headlight, but the more I think about it, I think I'm going to leave that chrome. And I might leave this chrome here, too. I'm not 100% sure yet. And the lower forks, I'm not even going to bother painting those because I mean, they get chipped up and tore up anyway. I'd end up repainting them about 1,000 times a year. So, that's what she looks like. Now, I have ridden this thing for about 15-20 minutes so far, so everything after this isn't like a first ride, but I have some notes. The first thing I really noticed with this thing is getting on it is a lot easier than it was without the big fender, the big seat, the saddlebags, the sissy bar. You just kind of walk up to it and just kind of hop right on. And one thing I did notice is I'm sitting a little closer to the tank than I did with the Mustang seat. Like, we're intimately kind of close. Anyway, let's go for a ride. I'd also kind of really appreciate it if you guys just kept that last part between us. I mean, yeah, there's no reason to tell anybody, right? So we are definitely sitting closer to the tank. And I actually have the Scoop Mod's 4-inch forward controls on this bike. And I almost feel a little tight, you know? It's like I'm really feeling it in my hips. Now, that might be because of something else. Now, I also have the 6-inch TJ Brutal Customs fork extensions, which kind of rakes the bike out a little bit. Because even with the Mustang seat, which I still stand by is the #1 best seat you can buy for your Honda Shadow. And when I had it on my 2008 Honda Shadow 750 Aero, I love it. But it did have like a nice little ridge that kind of held you in place. Even with the fork extensions, I kind of sat like right in that little crescent, I guess, if that makes sense. With this blue collar bobber seat, it definitely curves up at the end to kind of give you just a little bit of support, which probably works great at the factory rake, but with my plus 6 inches in the front, I almost feel like I'm going to slide off this thing. I'm not even, like, joking around. Like, if I goose it, which it's a 750 Shadow, so it's more like a Mallard ducking it, I guess. I don't know. It feels like I'm hanging on with the handlebars, and before I didn't have to do that. And as far as comfort goes, I'd say the seat's pretty good. I mean, it's noticeably different. I mean, obviously the padding's not as thick, it's not as big. And they do offer 3 different spring rates for the seat there, and I went with the heaviest ones, or the stiffest ones, which are rated for 240 pounds plus. Now, I'm not that big. I used to be way bigger than that. But their medium rate spring tops out about 230 pounds, and I'm about 225. So, and since I was kind of right there on the limit, I just went ahead and went with the stiffer springs. I mean, I can buy the softer ones if I need to. Real test is going to be when I take these shocks off and put those struts on there, because I definitely want to do that. But I got to figure out the seat, because with the rake, I'm angled back a little bit, and like I said, I don't feel... I got to figure out a way to raise the back of this seat up about 1 or 2 inches, and I think it'll be perfect. And I have an idea on how to do that, I just don't know when I'll be able to do it. But this isn't like a big, long hauler anyway. I use this thing for running around town and just goofing off. But at a minimum, I'm definitely going to have to adjust my floorboards forward a little bit more. Probably shouldn't do this while I'm riding, but you guys can see, I don't know if you can or not, I got them at the, the most rear setting, I guess. But I do feel a little cramped. I can definitely feel it in my hips. I don't know, it's not horrible, it's just a little uncomfortable. The seat looks great, though. I mean, holy crap. You know, I know function over form, but if we can function and look good, baby, we gonna do it. I also noticed, when I come to a stop here, that it feels a little, I don't know, it's more comfortable. And going back to the fork extensions, since it raked the bike out with the large Mustang seat, when I would put my legs down, edge of the seat would kind of dig into my thighs a little bit, and it would kind of, I mean, as comfortable as that seat is, it's not, am I falling over? It wasn't ideal, I guess. I don't know. Gooting and adjusting myself in the seat, too. I think once I change the angle, it'll be better. Then once I adjust the floorboards a little bit, and some of it's just going to take getting used to it. So, knowing what I know now, would I do this again? Maybe. That's not the answer you guys are looking for. You want me to say, heck yeah, I'd do it again. This is great. Best motorcycle ever. I'm not going to say that, because that'd be a lie.